The target is finally those religious bigots and social bigots who propound a creed above commonality, beyond universal rights, adhering simply to the rigour of the given word, whether it be Thatcher or Islam or Dave or others, James Jones, in all of its absolutism. And I think what Selfie is reminding us is that this is an all too ever-present danger in our culture. That with Thatcherism, we perhaps many people haven't recognised its absolute extremism and absolutism and the way it permeates all things. Under Busner's care, Dave meets Phyllis, the mother of another inmate, and eventually Dave cures himself, or appears to cure himself. But this is almost pathetic because his final demise is the result of earlier debts to sustain his work as a cabbie that he has abandoned to escape to rural Essex. In a curious way, and a kind of ironic way, Dave does become a martyr, although even Phyllis concludes his death was a suicide. His legacy, although despite him being a martyr of some kind, his legacy is the twisted world of his passing madness, where on Carl's return, the authorities send the supreme driver to oversee the destruction of the motos and of Ham itself. Carl descends to face them, and I quote, Carl took a deep breath. He needed no intercom. You know, it comes from the cabbie vocabulary of the religion. He needed no intercom to tell him this. That if there hadn't been Dave who so blighted the world, it would have been some other god, Jeebus or Joey or Ali, with his own savage edicts. Carl's uncertain future typifies a traumatological aesthetic. Its provisionality, rather than being conceptual, in fact derives from immediate attributable threats, neither playful nor inchoate in any sense that really matters. The text typifies certain features which in the contemporary British novel I described as the traumatological novel, which can be summarised variously as involving a response to uncertainty, a notion of fluctuating historical conditions, a response to or an inclusion of the threat of social upheaval, and often the imminence of an apparently regressive epoch, which is either ideologically or ecologically unstable. The chaos that also centres such narratives may be individual or collective, but it is marked paradoxically by its tangibility, a palpable sense of clear and present dangers. Also, as I said in that study, quote, of Dave, ironically, for someone who finally found love and tranquility, his legacy was that of passing madness. Thank you. It's only a work in progress, so yes.
So one of the quotations that you gave from the novel that I really liked was the idea of the knowledge being a comprehensive verbal map of the city. And so I was thinking about the links between the map and the verbal, and it was making me think about the Harry Kunzru's Memory Palace from last year, which is kind of both full of maps and dictionaries. So I wondered if you thought there was a connection between kind of a map and a dictionary here. It's something that seems really obsessed with kind of mapping and how language changes. Okay, yeah.
Let me think. Well, I'm not going to answer this directly. Let me work into it. I find this quite interesting because I actually find myself unconvinced by Will Self's notion of psychogeography. Okay. Because I don't think he's a psychogeographer. You know, I think psychogeography emerges from kind of Paris and revolutionary sort of ethos or radical ethos, and it's the idea of finding yourself in places in the city which kind of work and affect upon you. Okay, And it has very much akin actually to Jane Jacobs and Kevin Lynch, both of whom are American sort of writers on space and the social architecture of our lives. Jane Jacobs talks about street ballet and you know the movement of people and things affecting us, sort of not only aesthetically but kind of in terms of the narrative that it conveys. But if you think about Ian Sinclair and Will Self, they walk straight lines. They are middle-class men walking straight lines from A to B. They occasionally deviate, and they incorporate this as part of the social capital which they you know, turn into narrative, which is not the same thing to my mind as that other kind of psychogeography. Okay, they have more akin to William Wordsworth. The only difference is they haven't got Dorothy guiding them and doing most of the work for them, you know, which William had and never acknowledged. So you've got this kind of paradox in my view, and the knowledge is a very set thing, isn't it? But it crisscrosses. So the knowledge actually, by its complexity of numerous people doing these patterned forms of behaviour in an overlapping way, transcends the individual, yeah? And it's about transcending the individual potentially and becoming a kind of pattern and a sense of a cartography of the city in that way. But when it's reduced to its individual level and it's some guy on a scooter going around a set run, it's still very Wordsworthian in my although it's a kind of degraded form of the Wordsworthian, because by then it becomes commodified because it's being done for a purpose, which is, you know, acquisition of a career, following a pattern, and so you know it's like being reproduced, not quite mechanically, but almost kind of mechanically. Well, I suppose, yeah, moped is a mechanical thing. It's sort of being reproduced by mechanical action constantly with very slight variations, you know, because no one thing is ever another. So I don't know really. I don't know. But you know, I think in the novel, the complexity of the city is about the pattern of characters and their movement, and how they intersect with each other across time and space. And maybe that is his true psychogeography within the fiction. I'm less convinced about the writing about when I walked to Heathrow and then from Heathrow to wherever, a hotel in Manhattan or whatever it was. I don't know. You know, it's like I don't quite see that as radical. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I really like the idea that it's kind of collective, the knowledge rather than individual.
Well, it is in a way. It's an accumulative thing, I suppose. It must have been contributed to and added, and has elements of the palimpsest, I suppose, by committee. You know, with the PCO at the centre of it. You know, these. And if you've ever seen cabbie culture, I don't know if you've ever. I mean, believe it or not, I used to be a very good athlete in my youth and run marathons and half marathons, and I used to train over Hampstead Heath with a club there. And whole bunches of cabbies, because they have these peculiar hours, used to go over there and train, and it'd be all cabbies together. And they had this strange, almost kind of inbred sort of sense of collective exclusion of everyone else. So it's this odd thing of it's a collective, but it's a kind of inward excluding thing. And they had their own kind of ways of doing things, came at certain times. And I mean, and clearly Self did spend time with these cabbies, and you do get that sense when you, and I used to be a van driver when I worked with Will. We drove around London, and we would go and sort of gate crash their cafes that they had. Not the little shed-like things, but they had certain strategic cafes around London. You could almost sense a cafe that's a cabbie cafe, because you feel as if you've walked into a Wild West saloon and you've intruded upon their culture, you know. Anyway, yeah.
I don't know, do you want to go first? Yeah. I just wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind elaborating a little bit more on what you said about how the past functions as a prologue in this novel. Now, I haven't read the novel myself, but I am going to. I was very curious about the way you talked about the future in terms of kind of retro.
Well, this is I'm trying to describe what I think Self is doing. You know, I think it's obvious that the past is is prologue, but it's not necessarily a prologue to the future in ways that we anticipate. That's the point. It's the failure to anticipate what current actions and attitudes will lead to. You know, what they will seed in the future. So, I mean, it's a cliche, really, in a sense, because many of our actions have reactions, and they're not the ones that we predict. So we go along with a kind of whole range of beliefs and sort of social forms of behaviour, and then lo and behold something else kind of happens to that which we expected. And I think this is a warning by self that certain forms of behaviour and attitudes can perhaps result in things that you don't anticipate. I mean, the riots a couple of years ago were precisely, I mean, I didn't think they were going to happen and spin off and become this nationwide kind of fervour of disruption and rage, or whatever else it represented. It's kind of highly, I mean, clearly Cameron didn't predict it. He still wanted to stay on holiday, didn't he, until he realised he'd got to come back. Otherwise he was finished. And it's that kind of unpredictability of social movements that we tend in the academy to have a sense that, you know, that we can chart and describe and explain. But what we're doing is we're looking at what's happened always, not what's going to happen. You know, we're not actually futurologists. And self is trying to be a kind of a playful futurologist. You know, whether he's right or not is another issue, but I think it's just a kind of warning. Yeah. It's a bit like NW's like that, isn't it? You know, as they dismiss NW, it's sort of saying, actually the world is pretty bleak. People aren't always very nice, even though we like them, you know, even though we might love them. And, you know, what's the phrase they used to say? Shit happens, you know. It degrades. So, yeah.
On that positive note, we are going to have to wind this.
Thanks.